Hello everyone and welcome to The Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris coming to you from Rome in the aftermath of the meaningless summit on sex abuse and its cover-up, which never brought up once the questions swirling around Pope Francis himself about what he did, what he knew, and when he knew it. There are multiple questions stemming from multiple cases in question, and while they're getting some coverage in the secular media, there doesn't appear to be any significant response from the Vatican to the real charges or any real intense follow-up. Journalists just put the information out there as some kind of fact from past history, and they move on. So let's start at the beginning. When Archbishop Vigano released his first testimony last August, revealing some names of the homosexual current here in the Vatican, he also stated emphatically that Pope Francis knew McCarrick had been penalized and sidelined by Pope Benedict, but resurrected McCarrick despite his homo-predator past. One by one, liberal media, including liberal Catholic media like John Allen at Crooks, downplayed Vigano's confession, saying it should be taken with a huge grain of salt. But as the weeks wore on, it became clear on point after point that Vigano was correct on every last claim he had made. So what we had at that point was a pope who, knowing full well about McCarrick's homo-predator past, raised him back up to prominence and influence, a man who just a few years later he would have to dismiss from the clerical state entirely when his crimes became more widely known than just inside the walls of the Vatican here. That the Pope himself would personally do this with full knowledge was so disturbing that intrepid journalists started checking into his past to see if he had covered up for or protected any other clergy or even promoted them. So going back to his native Argentina and South America, reporters started surfacing other cases involving then Archbishop Bergoglio's involvement of covering up for predator clergy. One such case involved Father Julio Grassi, serving a 15-year sentence for sexual assault of minors, convicted in 2009, a case which shook Argentina. The next year after the conviction in 2010, Archbishop Bergoglio set out on a financially costly multi-year defense of Grassi to help him on appeal, producing a series of lengthy books declaring him innocent and the charges of the victim, Gabrielle, lies. The appeals wound through the court system until 2016 when the country's Supreme Court upheld Grassi's conviction. The thing is, through all this, Grassi was never under any church jurisdiction of Bergoglio. Grassi was not in Bergoglio's diocese, nor is Bergoglio his bishop. To this day, despite appeals from Gabrielle, Pope Francis has never offered an apology or even a word of comfort. In another case that saw international criticism of the Pope, he had to publicly apologize for backing a Chilean bishop, Juan Barros, who he himself appointed to the southern diocese of Osorno. Barros had covered for a homo-predator priest, Fernando Karadima, the most prolific abuser of young boys in the nation. The Vatican itself ruled him guilty in 2011. But what later came to light is how the Pope's pick for bishop, Juan Barros, had covered for the priest's crimes. When people in the diocese went ballistic over Francis naming Barros as their bishop, the Pope struck back in fury, defending Barros and insulting the people, calling them essentially liars. He said to the Chilean people that what they were saying was slander, and he added this, which is key, quote, "You, in all goodwill, tell me that there are victims, but I haven't seen any because they haven't come forward," closed quote. That would prove to be a lie from Pope Francis. In 2015, years earlier, Cardinal Sean O'Malley had placed directly into the hands of the Pope a letter from the victim detailing the account of his sexual assaults by the priest Karadima. O'Malley admitted as much when press reports brought details to light. So the Pope knew, years earlier, that Karadima was a homo-predator priest and that Bishop Juan Barros had covered for him, and the Pope still tried to press his appointment of Barros as bishop and lied about and insulted the people. He later had to apologize publicly, and that was that. In another case coming more to light now, Pope Francis appears to have tried to cover for a predator bishop from the Diocese of Oran in Argentina by creating a cushy job for him here at the Vatican. Bishop Gustavo Zanchetta is accused of sending nude photos of himself from his phone, masturbating, entering the rooms of his seminarians at night and sexually assaulting them, as well as a number of cases of financial improprieties. These charges made their way to the Vatican here in 2015, and Zanchetta came here to Rome to defend himself. Sources say he was able to convince the Pope that the nude pictures on his phone were photoshopped and fake, but no one has been able to verify that claim. But with regard to the seminarian issue, the internal report presented to the Vatican read, quote, Zanchetta would watch seminarians in their rooms at night with a flashlight, ask for massages, go into their rooms and sit on their beds, encourage them to drink alcoholic beverages, and had certain preferences for those who were more graceful looking, closed quote. The Vatican and the Pope knew about these charges between 2015 and 2016. But in 2017, Pope Francis brought Zanchetta here to Rome and created a post for him out of thin air in the office which handles the Vatican's real estate investments. Again, since this has all made its way into the mainstream media reports, and only because of that, Zanchetta has been removed from his comfortable position as a church investigation has gotten underway. This precisely is why any discussion at this past week's sex summit of abuse of seminarians had to be completely shut down by Cardinal Cupich and Archbishop Scicluna. It would have directly implicated the Pope because Zanchetta abused his own seminarians and the Pope knew all about it. A direct line. Then there is the case of the man nicknamed the Vice Pope because of his closeness to Francis, Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga. Maradiaga found himself in a gigantic scandal for defending and covering up for one of his auxiliary bishops, Jose Juan Pineda, who 50 of his seminarians, of Maradiaga's seminarians, accused him of homosexual predation. 50. Maradiaga blasted those reports as untrue, despite loads of credible evidence, and remains now still firmly ensconced here in Rome as the Pope's number 2, despite his defense of Pineda, who was also accused of massive financial impropriety the year before in a report that was given to Pope Francis. Yet, Maradiaga not only left him in place amidst all of these charges, he actually promoted Pineda to administrator of the diocese when Maradiaga himself was back and forth in Houston, Texas for cancer treatments. All of this, and late last year, Pineda submitted his resignation to the Pope with not a word from Maradiaga, not any substantive official explanation given, nor any apology from either Maradiaga or Pineda to the almost 50 seminarians who had to suffer the abuse and then undergo it again as the Pope's number 2 man attacked them while the Pope sat and did nothing. There's a pattern here with Pope Francis that many Catholics are saying is simply too much and that he has to go. Archbishop Vigano, who had not spoken of these charges, concluded on just the basis of the McCarrick situation that Francis should resign. As what these and many Catholics around the world are expecting to be even more cases continue to be brought forward, the question of the Francis papacy has to be revisited and openly discussed. The men around the Pope are cover-up artists who staged a phony summit to protect any more information about McCarrick coming public. Others are accused of their own cover-ups, like Maradiaga and Gracias. But even the Pope himself has covered up these sins and crimes. This papacy is going down in flames, and it's happening fast. Whether he resigns or not, the cause of this massive collapse is the homosexuality accepted and protected by Francis and his cronies, and the massive culture of cover-up that almost every cardinal around him participates in. From Cupich to Wuerl to McCarrick to Maradiaga to Tobin, and the list goes on. The next Pope, whoever and whenever, needs to give all these men the McCarrick treatment and bust them all down to the lay state, where many of them would end up behind bars for their sins and their crimes. In fact, we should all pray that Pope Francis does that himself and then resigns, signaling the reform he promised when he stepped out on that loggia almost 6 years ago will finally come to the Church, just not on his pontificate. Coming to you from Rome, I'm Michael Voris. God love you.